paradrama tales.
Single moms. When did you realize your kid wasn't as innocent as you thought? My teenage daughter pretended to be 20 online, so she could catfish a 23-year-old man, and I found myself storming a frat house at midnight to protect her only to find another predator lurking. I remember thinking I knew exactly what a 15-year-old looked like. Braces, bad bangs, a too big backpack, and zero interest in anything grown up. Back in my day, we hid behind ugly blue eyeshadow and worried more about pop quizzes than whether we looked hot. But on Annalise's birthday, as we slid into a booth at Chili's under those neon margarita lights, I barely recognized the girl across from me. Her corset top hugged every curve, cargo pants hung low on her hips, and her makeup, smoky eyes, sculpted brows, glossy lips made her look far older than her 15 years. My chest tightened the moment I saw her flip her long hair a single finger, twirling in practiced seduction as she giggled at the waiter's jokes. He leaned in, flashing a grin that felt too familiar to be innocent, and I saw the bulge in his jeans, confirmation that he'd mistaken my daughter for someone well past high school. Rage exploded in my veins. I slammed my palm on the tabletop and barked, "Excuse me, how old did you think she was?" Heat flooded his face as he stammered, red, spilling from his collar to his ears. I thought she was 20, he managed, voice shaking. We flagged down a new waiter, but the moment seared itself into my mind, the unbearable realization that my little girl was already navigating adult flirtation. Later, when Annalise brushed off my questions with a teenage eye roll, pinching the bridge of her nose, lips curled in that familiar silent rebellion, I knew I had to dig deeper. I grabbed her phone unlocked by her face and scrolled through private accounts I'd never seen. Sure, I found a few innocent TikTok videos, but then came the thirst traps, bikini snaps, tagged with college town locations, messages from boys she'd only met once, and one username that sent my heart leaping into my throat. She made me look 20. The DM read, sent straight to a university student's inbox. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment, the corset top that turned teenage curves into temptation, the waiter's misplaced flirtation, my daughter batting her eyelashes like she'd been taught. In an instant, my perfect childhood illusion shattered. No braces, no awkward haircuts, no hiding behind homework. Just a girl who felt the pressure to grow up faster, to navigate a world of adult games she wasn't ready for. And as the neon lights of Chili's faded from my memory, I knew one thing for certain: innocence wasn't lost to time. It could be stolen in a single sliver of a moment, and it was my job to get it back. I tucked Annalise back into her room that night and told her goodnight, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind churned with the image of her batting her eyes at that waiter, as though she already knew how to use her looks like a weapon. When I heard the faint click of her door, I tiptoed down the hall, heart pounding, and stood outside her bedroom. Moments later, I grabbed her phone from the charger, a device I'd always respected as her privacy zone, and unlocked it with her face. The home screen was deceptively innocent: TikTok, Snapchat, a few study apps. But one private account caught my eye, Anniel15. I tapped it, and suddenly the screen exploded with images I didn't expect. There she was, posing in a string bikini on our family's beach vacation, body angled, just so, lips parted pouty, her eyes dark and smoldering. The videos weren't dance trends or school projects. They were thirst traps, short loops of her, running her hand through her hair, swaying her hips, captions like, "Feeling nubbig, no filter." My stomach lurched. Next, I found her Instagram, a private profile following mostly girls, but under the surface a few guys liked and commented with winks and fire emojis. I scanned her tagged photos, and there it was, an image taken in that cafe where she supposedly met her college crush. The angle was candid, her hair spilling over her shoulders, a casual smile. Coffee cup lifted mid-sip. A direct message notification from Marcos Alvarez, 23, blinked in the corner. My pulse jumped. He wasn't in her school contacts. I opened the DM. His messages started innocently. "Hey, beautiful and loved seeing you at the cafe," but quickly spiraled into something more fraught. "Can't wait to see you again, and wish you were 20 so we could hang out." Comments like that chilled me. She'd catfished him posing as a 20-year-old, and he'd fallen for it. The realization cut deeper than any slap. My daughter was playing with fire, flirting with a man 8 years her senior, and doing it behind my back. I returned the phone to her bedside table, head spinning. The private videos, the bikini shots, the DM exchanges, all digital breadcrumbs, leading to a web of deception I never dreamed she'd weave. In one silent, terrifying sweep, the phone had revealed that innocence isn't just lost in the world outside. It can be traded online with every swipe and tap. And now, armed with undeniable proof, I knew it was time to step in, not as the scolding mom, but as the protector she desperately needed. I climbed the frat house's concrete steps just after midnight, heart thundering like a war drum, reminding me that maternal instinct can override any fear. The campus was silent except for muffled laughter and clinking bottles drifting through an open window, predators' bait, I thought. Research shows that predators often use alcohol and isolation to lower a victim's defenses, turning celebration into manipulation. Through the haze of party lights, I spotted him, shirtless, unshaven, beer in hand, leaning close to a trembling blonde. His easy grin vanished when I tapped him on the shoulder, and for a moment, I saw genuine fear flicker in his eyes, proof that guilt has its own glow. "Do you go to this school?" I asked calmly, voice low, but carrying authority. He whipped around, hands raised, ID out like a lifeline, but I didn't flinch. I slapped him twice so hard, the music inside bled into silence. His frat brothers froze the party's bravado, evaporating as I dragged him down the stairs, by the ear exactly like a mother cornering a cornered fox. In those few brutal seconds, power shifted. I was no longer a guest in his world of reckless entitlement, but the gatekeeper of justice. When we reached the bottom, I forced him to sit on the curb and opened my phone to the damning evidence, their catfish texts, his lopsided compliments, his "wish you were" 20 messages pressed into pixelated permanence. He spluttered denials. She lied about her age, but the timestamp chat logs on my screen didn't lie. I informed him that befriending a minor under false pretenses is both grooming and a felony under state law, a lesson he would carry into any courtroom. Onlookers murmured as he scrambled to block her number, the final twist in his secret romance unspooling publicly. I didn't gloat. No words could match the gravity of his betrayal. Instead, I tucked the phone away and fixed him with a steady glare. "You tried to exploit my daughter. That's on you. And so will everything that follows." As I walked away, wrists still throbbing from our scuffle, I felt rage cool into resolve. Protecting her innocence meant confronting darkness head-on, and no amount of frat house bravado could shield him from the consequences of his choices. In that moment, I became both her shield and her advocate, proving that true courage isn't born of violence, but of unwavering conviction to stand between predators and the vulnerable. ChatGPT said, when we finally staggered through the front door, Annalise didn't fling herself into my arms. She collapsed onto her bedroom floor, tears cascading like a broken dam, and I heard my own heart shatter in response. I knelt beside her, the weight of her sobs settling in my chest, and gently asked her to tell me everything, promising I would listen without interruption. Through her trembling voice, she revealed how he had leaned close, how the beer had tasted off, and how, in a blur of laughter and flashing lights, she felt the room spin and her stomach drop. With every detail, each whispered compliment he'd pressed into her ear, each moment she'd tried to steady herself against his predatory advances. My anger shifted into fierce sorrow for the betrayal of a child I had thought safe. I stroked her hair as she cried, whispering that none of this was her fault, that predators prey on trust and on teenagers desperate to be seen as grown. In those minutes, I realized that real strength isn't found in a slap or a shout, but in the quiet promise of unwavering presence. As her sobs subsided into ragged breaths, I scooped her into my arms and held her tight, whispering the vow I would carry forward. "I see you. I believe you. I will never let you face this alone." In that soft embrace, I felt her pain meld into courage, and I knew our path forward would be paved by her truth. There would be no shame, no blaming of a child who only wanted to be noticed. Instead, we would turn her fear into action, gathering evidence, rallying other girls, and confronting a system that too often shields its own. In the hush of her bedroom, littered with posters of happier days, I learned that a mother's fiercest act of love is not just to defend, but to honor her child's broken voice, to cradle it gently, and to transform sorrow into the steadfast determination to protect and to heal. That evening, I parked 2 blocks from the university's pool and slipped my phone into my coat pocket, ready to become a silent witness to the tactics that had ensnared my daughter. Through the crack in a chain-link fence, I raised my phone's camera and zoomed in on Marcus as he leaned in beside a petite blonde whose posture screamed uncertainty. He laughed low, flirting his gaze along her hairline, his hand sliding almost imperceptibly from her shoulder to rest at her waist. As she shifted closer, he produced a slender silver flask and offered her a drink. I caught him tipping a powdery substance into her cup, while she craned her neck at a diversion, a group gathering by the diving board, before she sipped and blinked against the sting of déjà vu. I followed his routine for nearly 2 hours, the way he targeted each newcomer, greeting them with familiar charm, gauging their comfort, before pushing gently on their boundaries, then backing off whenever a friend approached. It wasn't just about alcohol. It was about control. I watched him test a second girl by brushing her hair behind her ear, murmuring, "You're so beautiful enough times to lull her into silence," then offering another pour from the flask. When her friend returned, he shifted persona, arms open in a brotherly embrace, voice casual, only to revert the instant she turned away. That performance of facade, I realized, was his grooming strategy. Affectionate stranger, reliable confidant, then back to charming predator. I recorded snippets of each exchange, 5 videos in all, and cataloged timestamps on my notes app. Every subtle boundary test, every whispered compliment, every calculated retreat into harmless fun was proof that this man thrived on blurring the line between flirtation and violation. When the first girl stumbled away blinking at the chlorine-scented air, I lowered my phone and exhaled. The evidence was clear patterns of manipulation, repeated again and again. Later in my car's dim glow, I reviewed the footage and realized how essential these recordings would be. Law enforcement needs patterns, not just a single accusation. I labeled each clip and backed them up to the cloud. Gathering evidence didn't feel vindictive. It felt necessary, a way to expose his tactics and protect other young women, including the daughter I was sworn to shield. As I closed my laptop that night, the outlines of a plan formed: confront him with witnesses at a neutral location, rally other victims, and compile a dossier strong enough to force the university and police to act. Undercover surveillance had revealed the grotesque choreography of his predation, and armed with that proof, I was ready to stop him in his tracks. The next morning, I gathered the courage to reach out not to Lily, but to the 3 freshmen whose names Jason had quietly passed along: Vanessa, Talia, and one other whose story faintly echoed Annalise's. We agreed to meet at a quiet campus cafe, a neutral ground where no one wore Greek letters or wielded entitlement. When I arrived, Vanessa sat with her arms wrapped tight around a coffee cup, eyes wary beneath heavy lids. Talia hovered by the door, glancing over her shoulder as though expecting judgment. I recognized the avoidance, the same fear I'd felt before confronting Marcus, but I offered only kindness and a simple truth. "You're not alone." Vanessa was the first to speak. "I didn't report it because I thought no one would believe me," she whispered, voice trembling. She described how she'd woken in his off-campus apartment, with no memory of how she'd arrived, convinced she'd done something to deserve it. Talia nodded, adding that she'd tried to tell a resident advisor, but was dismissed. Marcus's father was on the board, she said, and they wouldn't rock the boat. Their shame was palpable, a heavy cloak they were desperate to shed. I listened without interruption, letting their words fill the space between us like a balm. When the last shuddering confession ended, I asked if they'd be willing to put their experiences down, in writing an anonymous statement at first, if that felt safer. They exchanged glances, the bravest moment of our lives quietly unfolding. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Talia's fingers twined in her lap. Then, in that stillness, they nodded. Together we sketched a plan, gather our statements, corroborate timelines, and collect any digital breadcrumbs, texts, photos, scribbled notes, then present our dossier to campus security and the Title IX office. Power in numbers. I reminded them, predators thrive on isolation, but solidarity is their undoing. We shared phone numbers and agreed on a secure group chat, a circle bound by truth rather than shame. By the time we rose from our chairs, shoulder blades straighter and hearts lighter, we had become a coalition. We weren't just victims anymore. We were witnesses with voices ready to turn our pain into protection for others. As we stepped back into the afternoon sun, I saw in their eyes the flicker of something new: hope. In that fragile brightness, I understood healing would come not through silence, but through rallying the hurt until the echoes of our courage drowned out every lie. My phone buzzed just as I was about to sit down for dinner, and when I saw the message, my blood ran cold. "Back off, or your daughter's private photos go public." My heart pounded as I read it again, realizing this was no idle threat, but a predator's cruel leverage. Overnight, he'd slipped from arrogant frat boy to blackmailer, weaponizing images meant for one trusting pair of eyes. I gripped the table edge and exhaled slowly. This was exactly the terror I'd hoped to prevent. Without hesitation, I tapped out a reply. "Distributing explicit images of a minor is a federal offense. Do it, and you'll spend the next decade in prison." Then I hit send, knowing that invoking the law was both a shield and a deterrent. I didn't really care if he believed me. I cared that he knew I would not be intimidated. Next, I drafted a plan. If I didn't check back in by 10 o'clock, Annalise was to take the sealed dossier of evidence directly to the police, a safety net, to ensure that our investigation couldn't be buried under frat house influence. In it lay the Catfish texts, the surveillance videos, the freshman's written statements, and screenshots of his threats. I found Annalise in her room, eyes wide with fear, and knelt beside her bed. "I need you to promise me something," I said softly. "If you don't hear from me by 10 tonight, you grab that envelope and go straight to the campus safety office. You do not hesitate." She nodded, swallowing hard, and I swept her into a fierce embrace, my daughter, my greatest treasure, now an accomplice in her own protection. By 8 o'clock, I'd called Jason, Vanessa, and Talia, briefing them on Marcus's blackmail and asking them to position themselves near the meeting spot. I switched to a burner phone and chose a crowded late-night coffee shop for our final rendezvous, public well lit with security cameras. I slipped a small recording device into my pocket and reviewed my notes. My opening statement, the legal citations, the ultimatum I would deliver face to face. As midnight approached, I sat with a clear view of the entrance hand on my hidden phone, eyes scanning every arrival. The threat still thrummed through me, but beneath it lay a fierce resolve. Predators rely on fear and secrecy, but I had courage, community, and proof. And no matter what came through that door, I was ready to stand my ground, because protecting my daughter meant rousing every ounce of my bravery in defense of her safety and dignity. I chose a crowded corner of the 24-hour coffee shop, nestled between a study group and the late-night crammers, and waited with my heart pounding in my throat. Vanessa and Talia slipped in, quietly, faces pale but determined, while Jason lingered by the door, ready to call for help if needed. At exactly 8:30, Marcus stumbled in eyes bloodshot shirt, untucked, swaggering, as though he owned every neon sign in the city. He spotted me and froze the grin draining from his face as he took in the witnesses arrayed behind me. I stood and motioned to the empty seat across the table. He sat stiff-shouldered, clutching a half-full coffee. Without raising my voice, I laid out the morning's text, distribute those photos, and face federal charges, and slid my phone screen across the table so he could read the real-time history of his threats. His jaw tightened as I calmly recited the names of the other victims who waited only yards away, ready to speak. "You promised to delete the images," I said, finger-tapping the dossier of evidence at my elbow. "You promised to stay away from my daughter and her friends. You promised to get help. Those are your only options tonight." He scoffed and spun the cup in his hand, trying to muster the frat house bravado that fell flat in the harsh fluorescent light. "You've got nothing," he slurred, voice brittle. "No proof." I glanced at Vanessa, who rose and said, "I'll tell my story right here, right now," and began to describe with clinical clarity how he'd slipped her that spiked drink by the pool. Talia followed, recounting her own near-identical experience. The other students in the cafe fell silent as each account landed like a verdict. Marcus's face went from defiant red to ashen gray. He tried to interrupt, claiming they were lying, but every head turned toward him, every patron a silent jury. I leaned in, voice steady. "You used alcohol secrecy and your university status to prey on teenage girls. Tonight you admitted it in front of witnesses. You have one last chance." I watched him tremble, the flimsy armor of privilege cracking under the weight of our collective resolve. He shoved his chair back and bolted for the door, Jason on his heels warning him that law enforcement was on its way. As he vanished into the night, I felt a fierce relief wash over me, no final words necessary. Vanessa and Talia exhaled in unison and sat back down, their shoulders still squared, their voices no longer muted by fear. In that crowded coffee shop, with the hum of espresso machines and whispered apologies, power had genuinely shifted. Predators thrive in darkness, but under the glare of truth and solidarity, they have nowhere left to hide. That night, as I sat with Annalise afterward, her head on my shoulder, the dossier of our collective truths laid out between us, I realized we'd done far more than expose one predator. We'd reclaimed our power, our voices, and each other. In the days that followed, the university launched a Title IX investigation campus. Forums buzzed with parents demanding safer policies, and the other young women found courage to report their own stories. Annalise began to sleep through the night again, her eyes brighter, free of that haunted look I'd feared would never lift. Watching her laugh at a silly movie 2 nights ago, I felt a fierce joy. Healing isn't a neat finish line, but a series of small victories, a wakeful morning, without tears, an unguarded smile, a renewed trust that the world can be kinder. If there's one truth I've learned, it's that predators feed on isolation, so courage sprouts in community, mom to daughter, victim to victor, neighbor to ally. Now I invite you, if you or someone you know has faced the shadow of exploitation, please share your story in the comments below. Your courage can light the way for others. Subscribe to join our circle of resilience. Hit the bell so you won't miss our next episode on standing strong against the unseen dangers of today's digital world. And remember, when we stand together, even the darkest secrets cannot hide, and healing can begin in the light of truth.